Paging Dr. Ross. Paging Dr. Ross. Please report to X-ray. Please report to Dog X-ray. CQDX. CQDX. CQ Dog X-ray. Calling CQ Dog X-ray. CQ Dog X-ray.
From the publishers of CQ Magazine.
Hello, CQ20, CQ20, CQ20.
NRC, this is K8ODP.
We'll show you the shack a little bit.
Oscar, CQ Oscar 13.
Into HGR.
A CQ Video Operating Guide.
Getting started in DXing.
Listen carefully, and you'll hear the words of the world's very first DXer.
I am personally responsible to a certain extent for this rather remarkable feat. Famine for the first time of the Atlantic Ocean by radio, which occurred on December the 12th, 1901, when in a haphazard receiving station rigged up by myself at St. John's, Newfoundland, I was able to receive a succession of 3 clicks corresponding to the 3 dots of the letter S launched by a Morse key into space at Paul in Cornwall on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean.
That was the voice of Guglielmo Marconi, the man credited by many with inventing radio, and without question, the first person to hear a radio signal sent to him across an ocean.
The thrill of DXing, of listening for faraway signals, and of talking to those faraway people is as old as radio itself. And while satellites, television, and other tools of modern technology have made our world seem smaller and smaller, the thrill of DX and the thrill of the chase are as strong as ever.
Good morning, my friend. Several things excite me about DXing. I think one is just the thrill of the chase, the competition. But probably the biggest thing is still it's a thrill to work someone in a foreign country. It's a thrill to work a Russian in Siberia. It's a thrill to work a fellow on a practically deserted island near the South Pole that took an icebreaker to get to. It's exciting to talk to people around the world in different countries, not only to obtain QSL cards, but you make friends with some of these people and you can actually share experiences and develop some pretty good friendships.
During this program, we'll take a look at equipment and antennas. We'll talk about ways to find and catch DX, and how to get those QSL cards that confirm your contacts and qualify you for a variety of operating awards. We'll check in with some leading DXers and some new DXers. We'll pass along their hints for success, and you'll discover that DXing is something any ham can do with the right tools, the right skills, and the right amount of luck. Finally, we'll present the first ever videotape of a ham actually being bitten by the DX bug.
If you've come into ham radio through the VHF bands and you're used to the strength and clarity of FM repeaters, you may be in for a surprise the first time you listen to single sideband. In fact, you may not understand anything at all. If you're having trouble, don't worry. The more you listen, the easier it'll be. Not only to understand the strong stations, but also to pick out the weaker ones.
Roger, Roger.
Picking out weak stations can be easier on CW or Morse code. And you'll find a lot of DX stations on CW whom you might never even hear on voice.
Regardless of which mode you come to prefer, there's plenty of opportunity to work good DX, even with a simple station. And if your license won't let you operate just yet on the HF bands, we'll let you in on a little secret. You can work DX on VHF and UHF. We'll even show you how. Just what is DX anyway? And what makes people so crazy about it? And believe me, they do go crazy over it. At its simplest, DX is an abbreviation for distance. Among hams, though, it generally means other hams in other countries.
There are three basic types of DX: plain DX, rare DX, and nearly impossible DX. The rarity of a location depends less on how remote it is than on how many active hams it has. Japan, with over 1 million hams, is good DX, but not rare DX.
JA1CG from KM4OH.
The Maldive Islands, with about 40 hams, is rare DX.
Maldive Island, 8Q7. Whiskey Alpha 2, Bravo, Foxtrot, Whiskey.
And Bouvet Island, halfway between South Africa and Antarctica, with no hams, in fact, no people, is nearly impossible DX. Why nearly impossible? Because these places are occasionally put on the air by DXers crazy enough to take incredible risks to get there, set up a station, and operate. These special operations are called DXpeditions.
What you're hearing is a pileup. What happens when dozens of stations are calling one station on one frequency at the same time. As you get more involved in DXing, you'll stop calling places by name and simply refer to them by their ham radio prefix. Japan, the Maldives, and Bouvet, for example, are known to DXers as JA, 8Q7, and 3Y5.
The rarity of a country is also affected by world politics. For decades, ZA, Albania, was at the top of every DXer's most needed list. The communist government there had banned ham radio. But as the Soviet bloc came tumbling down, the ZAs got back on the air and started making up for lost time. Even our producer was able to snag one while taping these shows.
Box 5, Elbasan, Albania, QSL. Thank you for the contact and for my first Albania. 73, ZA1 Bravo Mike, NW2L.
The main part of this show was built around some basic questions asked by beginning DXers.
Number 1. What's the most important piece of equipment for successful DXing?
Number 2. Do I need to have a giant antenna to work DX?
3. What are the secrets of finding and working DX stations?
4. I only have a technician class license. Can I work DX too?
And 5. Once I've worked a DX station, how do I get a QSL card?
We'll pose these questions to some top DXers and find out if they agree on the answers. Plus, we'll get a look inside the shacks of a few big guns and hear what keeps them excited about DXing. Paul Soban, NO0T, is a Canadian transplanted to North Carolina by way of Minnesota, where he picked up the zero call. Paul says his main pleasure in ham radio right now is helping other DXers as sysop of the W4DW packet cluster in Raleigh, North Carolina. Another one of Paul's ham radio pleasures is his daughter Laura, who at age 8 became
KD4OZC 73.
KN8Z is John Doc Scheller, an antenna farmer who practices dentistry in his spare time. He built his house around his shack, and until the next new country comes along, he's worked them all.
Ron Levy, K2AIO, is a past president of the North Jersey DX Association and manager of the ARRL Incoming QSL Bureau for the 2nd Call District.
John Bergio, W2JB, is an accomplished DXer who puts many hours of volunteer time into making sure other DXers receive the payoffs for their efforts. He's one of the letter managers for the 2nd District QSL Bureau. Marty Silver, NY4H, holds several unusual distinctions. She's not only a female DXer, but one of the few women of her generation who got into the hobby on her own. Marty's husband is not a ham and says he's not interested.
Hans Muir, W2TO, has been chasing DX for nearly 50 years. First licensed in his native Germany as DL1XX, Hans has worked over 100 countries on QRP, which is less than 5 watts, and another 100 plus using just a wire antenna. We'll visit some medium and little guns too, to see how they and you can work DX without a California kilowatt or a big antenna farm. KA8 NRC's wall tells the story in his shack. Anthony Luscre has had great success at DXing, though his shack is relatively modest compared to those of the big guns. Anthony teaches licensing courses at his radio club and enjoys helping new hams get set up and on the air. He shares his station with his wife Linda, KA8 ODP.
Mike Marditt, WA2VQW, takes great pride in his home-built antennas, which have snagged him over 200 countries. Mike says he has never bought a commercially built antenna and never plans to. He operates HF not only from his basement shack, but also from his car, using, what else, an antenna of his own design.
Cindy Wood, KD4ACW, is a relatively new ham and a brand new DXer. When we met Cindy, she had just upgraded to advanced. Her father, who's also a ham, had set her up with a 50-watt transmitter and a multi-band dipole in the attic of her house.
Steve Castleberg, AB4SL, lives in New Hill, North Carolina, a rural area south of Raleigh. He does all of his DXing with wire antennas.
Like many hams, Marv Shelton, WA2BFW, likes computers. He's on Packet, HF RITI, and Amtor, and he runs a landline or telephone-accessed computer bulletin board that's devoted to ham radio. But Marv's use of computers in his ham shack doesn't end there.
Hello, 6020, 6020, 6020 meter phone from Whiskey Alpha 2 Bravo.
And as promised, we'll show you the bite of the DX bug.
I think the single most important element in a station is its receiver, because of the fact, and there's an old saying, if you can't hear them, you can't work them.
I have always felt that the most important piece of equipment for a DXer, other than his ability to operate, is your antenna. But you must combine that with an operator who can copy Morse code, who is willing to spend the time, and DXing is a commitment of a lot of time. And a beginning DXer should realize that time, the commitment of time to just look for these countries and an understanding of the propagation combined with a fair or a decent antenna system will produce pretty good results.
In order to work DX, you have to be able to hear the DX. And that means having a good receiver, and that means one that has good sensitivity to hear weak signals, one that has good selectivity to weed out signals in a bunch of different signals, and good overload characteristics. In other words, you don't want a receiver that the guy 2 blocks down the road is going to overload your receiver when he's on 20 meters and you're on 40. So a good receiver is, I think, is a good foundation for any station.
The antenna is the answer not only for reaching out from your standpoint, but being able to receive a station and not miss anything he says by being clobbered by QRM from the side, the back, or wherever, if you were, say, operating with a dipole.
I think the most important thing is to have a good transceiver. A good receiver particularly. The receiving section should be as good as can be made. And the reason for that is if you can't hear them, you can't talk to them. They may be able to hear you, but if you don't hear the response, you are in big trouble. So the most important thing is the receiver, and second to that, of course, is the antenna.
The most important element of the station for successful DX has got to be antennas. Another thing I got to do while I was in college was play around building a lot of different antennas with a lot of roof space and access to wire and stuff. So I used to build wire antennas. There's nothing like running through the snow in the middle of 2 minutes before a contest starts, trying to hook up that last antenna, that's going to put you over the top.
I would say the 2 most necessary pieces of equipment for DXing are your ears, followed closely by your brain. And the radio comes in a distant third, and then after that probably is your antenna. Most people think that the most important piece of equipment for DXing is an amplifier so they can put a real loud signal on the air. But really what's the most important thing is learning how to listen for DX, how to hear the DX in the first place, and once you hear the DX, figure out what pattern the DX is working so you have a chance of working it. Once you figure that out, 5 watts has just a very good chance of getting in, whereas if you don't go through the trouble of listening to the pattern and finding how the station's working, any amount of power won't work in many cases.
As you can see, there are two schools of thought among DXers as to which piece of equipment is most important, the receiver or the antenna. The basic theory behind both choices is the same. If you can't hear them, you can't work them. Even those people who ranked the receiver as the most important item agreed that the antenna runs a close second. So let's take a closer look at antennas and the different kinds that our DXers are using.
No matter what their size or shape, antennas all have the same basic job: putting radio signals into the air for other people to hear and pulling in the signals that other antennas have put out. You can buy your antennas, or like Mike Martit, WA2VQW, you can build them.
Today my antennas consist of a 2-element homemade quad for the 20 and 15 meter bands. On 10 meters I have a full wave loop which is suspended from a branch in a tall maple tree about 50 feet above the ground, and I can rotate that by manipulating a rope from the ground, and it works quite well. I've worked about 140 countries just on the wire loop. On other bands, on 80 meters, I'm using a 53-foot aluminum vertical, and I'm feeding it at the bottom with a network of my own design. The SWR is low over the entire band, and I again have worked over 100 countries with that antenna in the last 6 months.
An antenna is almost an extension of a receiver, because that's really what's going to pull your signal in. There's an old rule we used to have up in the north that if your antenna stayed up through the winter, it wasn't big enough. The idea is you want to have as large an antenna as you possibly can. King Kong is an expression that's used sometimes when referring to antennas. The larger the antenna, sometimes the better you can receive the signals, the better you can pull them in.
Well, I like my beam. Of course, you can work with dipoles, and some people have verticals and have all the bands on this one vertical. And there are different kind of beams. Everybody has their own idea, you know, what kind they'd like to have and what works the best. But I've been very happy with mine.
People get confused between power and antennas, and I think they feel that additional power will get a better signal when you can do a lot more with a good antenna. The more aluminum you have up in the sky and the closer you are to the clouds, the better your signal's going to be.
But the question most new DXers have about antennas is how little you can get away with. Will a simple wire antenna work for DXing?
My antennas here are dipoles strung in the trees. Don't have a tower up at the moment. In fact, I've never had a tower, and so I use dipoles. I have several dipoles up at the moment. I have a 160 meter dipole, an 80 meter dipole, a 40 meter dipole, and a 30 meter dipole. And with the tuner in the rig, I use those dipoles on all bands, 160 through 10. And it works fair to good depending on the band. Like I said, I've managed to work DXCC on at least every band and approaching 200 countries on most of them.
A lot of people think that they need to put a lot of power out, they need an amplifier, but what in fact happens is with an antenna, they get a gain in their signal strength going out, but they also get a gain in the signals that they can hear, because an antenna works on both receive and transmit, something no amplifier can do. One thing though that many hams worry about when they first start out is that they don't have an antenna that's good enough. And my saying to novices especially is, any antenna is better than no antenna.
That's because it takes more than equipment to work DX. The other essential ingredients are coming up next.
Yes, there is a secret formula for successful DXing. Luckily, we've been able to persuade the DXers who helped us with this program to share some of their secrets.
DXing is a skill that does not necessarily tie you to the size of the antenna and to your power and your station. There is a large degree of skill, I believe, in DXing, and it's something that can be learned from books. It can be learned from other hams, and it can be, of course, learned on the air itself by just finding out what people do and how people work DX.
You've got to really maximize your signal on 20 meters. 20 meters is and always will be the king of the DX bands.
Listen first. That's the main thing, is listen first. Most DXpeditions now, the big rare ones, will work what they call split. They'll transmit at one frequency and receive at another. And you have to listen to find out how they're working it, whether they're going up and down the band, whether they're listening in one place. And you need to be polite. A lot of them aren't.
First of all, the success of working DX is based on 99% listening and 1% transmitting. And if you listen to a DX station and you get to know his operating habits, it's much easier to break a pileup. For example, a DX station is operating on one frequency, and you have to determine whether he's listening up or down from his transmitting frequency. This assumes, of course, that he's working split. And most DXpeditions do work split, so that there's no interference on his frequency. Now you've determined that he's working up from his frequency. Now the trick is to find the last station he worked, or the last few stations he worked, and see if he is tuning up in that range or if he's tuning down in that range. If he's tuning up, you place your transmitted signal slightly higher than the last station he worked. If he's tuning down, of course, it's slightly lower. So that's one way of trying to snag this guy without just putting yourself in any old place and hoping for the best.
Sometimes what they'll be doing is they'll be taking tail enders. This is where the DX station works one station, and while they're giving their reply, they immediately listen for a station that might call them before they even call for any more stations. So in fact, they're listening for the next station while they're listening to the station that they're working. Sometimes they'll work different geographic zones, or they'll be working by call areas, or they might be working a certain geographic location. For example, they might be trying to work Europeans, so even though everyone's calling, you might not ever be able to break through the pileup, but then 15 minutes later when they're working North America, you might have very quick success. Some of the other ways that stations operate is they might be doing a list type of operation where they'll be having one station to listen, make a list, and then they're calling specific stations that have been heard on the list. That's just some of the many, and there's just an infinite number of ways that different DX stations like to listen for other stations.
It is not high power that will establish a long-distance contact, given conditions that are favorable for DXing. And they vary, as many of the aspiring hams will find out. But when conditions are good, it is possible with the smallest of power and with a very simple antennas, as I have done with dipoles, to work all continents, and not only to maintain a conversation like I did with a German friend in the Sudan over half an hour without having lost one letter on both sides with my small 2-watt rig, but that you also can go into pileups and into contests and just behave as if you had 1 kilowatt. And what it shows to me, and always did show to me, is the timing in a pileup. And they came back as if I had had a kilowatt and I had only a small HW8. I have done this many times.
Tune the band and find the station you haven't worked. If you're tuning the band in the mid-afternoon and you're here at 5T5 in Mauritania and in Africa, then you know that that's the proper time to come in. You've copied the call correctly. Then go back to him and work him. And you should now realize that that part of Africa will probably come in most of the time during that time. You make a mental note of that. But you must listen, and you must look around, and you must understand which bands are open at which time.
let me tell you a very funny thing about propagation. When I first got my license, I got a radio that covered 5 bands, and I got an antenna up that would cover the various bands. But I didn't know what time of day to listen to various bands. And I would spend my evenings listening on 10 meters and hearing nothing. Or sometimes during the day I'd put it on 80 meters or 40 meters and I would hear almost nothing. I would hear a few stations, they were very close to me, and I couldn't understand what everyone was talking about working DX and how you found these DX stations. Well, after a short period of time I got some experience and I read more about propagation, and I learned that you had to know propagation to know where to listen for stations. Without that fact, you could spend a lot of time listening and not hearing any DX or not even hearing any stations at all.
Before we move on, let's take a minute to review the operating tips that our group of DXers has shared with us.
DX strategy number 1, listen. Successful DXers spend most of their time listening, learning the habits of stations and pileups, and tuning around for weak signals.
I hear many people who are calling, making a general call called CQ, instead of listening. I have done all my operating and have worked the most rarest station only because I listened for him, waited until he finished, and then there was my chance. And I called split second, and here he came back. And I could have called 25 times CQ, and he never would have answered me. And for that matter, perhaps nobody else would have answered. But I always nailed him. And this is something that any serious DXer would have to consider. Timing, listening, patience.
Strategy number 2 is patience and perseverance, especially if you're not running a lot of power and don't have a big antenna. You may have to wait until the big guns have quieted down before you can work that rare station or DXpedition. But persistence is often rewarded with a contact.
Persistence is a lot of it. When you've got a small station, it helps to tune around and be the first one to hear the guy come on the air, or be one of the very few people to start calling him before the pilot gets too big.
Learn about the science behind the art of DXing. Study propagation and make use of WWV's reports on solar activity to figure out which band will offer the best DX.
The other thing is start off early in the mornings, because that's usually a good time to when the conditions are starting to become favorable in your area, and start tuning from the low end of the band and work your way up and keep listening all the way up the band, listening for QTHs that are rare, listening for weather reports and things like that indicate that the station you're listening to is a rare DX station. That's how you find the DX, just by simply tuning and listening.
And of course, learn from your fellow DXers through packet cluster reports, DX clubs, DX newsletters, and DX columns in the ham magazines. As we've seen, your success depends much more on your skill than on your equipment.
But one of the things that I do is I do play little voice games. I mean, we all, try using a higher voice, a lower voice, an accented voice, or something like that. So I play little voice games. After hearing the DX station's accent, sometimes you can phonetically give your call in his language, Spanish or something. I had Spanish in high school. I'm not fluent in it by any means, but I can say a few words. And things like that. I kind of try to mimic their accent, hoping, they think it's one of their countrymen that's off, by himself somewhere, and wanted to talk to somebody back home. So that's probably my biggest trick. Yeah, I guess I am good at that.
What's your call in Spanish?
What's my call? Yeah. It's not. You mean you want me to do it, or? Okay, I gotta get my Spanish accent. Let's see. Washington America 2 Bravo Foxtrot Whiskey. I said with a Spanish accent, so it's just
Coming up next, how to work DX if your skills don't happen to include Morse code.
Ham radio's traditional DX bands are on HF, the frequencies below 30 megahertz, where hams may operate only if they've passed a Morse code exam. But if you've entered the hobby with a codeless technician license, then and you haven't yet upgraded, don't feel left out. You can still work DX. Don't count on 2-meter FM for doing it, though. You'll have to explore a bit more of the many privileges your technician license offers.
For starters, there's 6 meters, from 50 to 54 megahertz. While it's not available to hams in every country, and most often provides coverage of up to 1,000 miles or so, band openings are common enough that many dedicated 6-meter operators have worked 100 countries or more on the band, and have worked all continents in doing so. There's plenty of DX on 6.
Now, you might not think of 2 meters and 70 centimeters, the 420 to 450 megahertz band, as places for DXing. After all, communications on these frequencies are basically line of sight. But line of sight straight up is a few billion miles. Now, we're not promising contacts with other planets, but imagine if there were repeaters in the sky, a few thousand miles up, that could pick up your signal at, say, 435 megahertz and retransmit it on 2 meters. Line of sight could cover half the world.
It could, and it does, with ham radio's DX satellites, Oscar 10 and Oscar 13. They provide hours of dependable DXing every day, and you only need a technician class license to use them. Other ham satellites function as flying mailboxes for packet radio. You need special equipment to use them, but the combination of satellites and other links makes DX available on packet as well. Don't count on direct keyboard-to-keyboard contacts with hams across the world, but you can exchange messages with DX hams as easily as you can with those here at home.
You can learn more about packet radio and amateur satellites through 2 other programs in CQ's Getting Started series. Their titles are Getting Started in Packet Radio and Getting Started in Amateur Satellites. Now, let's take a look at what you do once you've actually made a DX contact. On-air contests give you the best opportunity to work many different countries in a short time. There's practically one every weekend, with several major DX contests each year. Don't worry just yet about a high score or competing with the big guns. You're in there to work new countries, not win the contest. Watch the ham magazines for contest listings. In order to qualify for most operating awards, you need to prove you've made the required number of contacts. QSL cards are ham radio's proof of contact.
QS selling is sort of an art. Most of the DXpeditions, most of the fellows that go out around the world and put a country on the air specifically for DXers to work, have a QSL manager. You need to find out who that QSL manager is. It's listed in CQ magazine, it's listed in QST, and if you subscribe to some of the DX news sheets, it'll list these people who their QSL manager is. It's much more convenient if their manager is stateside. Simply takes a 29-cent stamp on a self-addressed envelope, you send them the card. If you're a nice guy, you send them a small donation to help defray the cost of the expedition. It gets a little trickier when the QSL manager is in Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Southeast Asia, because here the mails are not quite as good. The cards disappear, the money's stolen. Sometimes you'll have to send 3 or 4 cards directly overseas in order to obtain a card back. One other method of QSLing, which is not as efficient and is very slow, is via the bureau. The majority of countries in the world have QSL bureaus. The United States has a QSL bureau. Each call district has a QSL bureau in it, and you need to keep an envelope on file with your local QSL bureau.
Our bureau is the 2nd District Incoming DX QSL Bureau, which means that we handle only cards coming from DX stations that are addressed to stations whose call has a 2 in it. The call was issued in the 2nd District. You don't have to live in the 2nd District, but the call has a 2. And there are 2s who live in Hawaii and California and Florida and all over the world, and we forward cards to them. The cards that we receive in the Bureau first are distributed to 12 primary sorters. These sorters will sort the cards once alphabetically by the first letter after the number 2. This is called the suffix, and it's the first letter in the suffix. They will sort them again by the second letter in the suffix, and they make little packets. At the following meeting, they will bring these sorted cards and distribute them into the letter manager's bags, which are labeled, they're grocery bags and are labeled A through Z. QST lists all of the incoming bureaus on a regular basis. It's not every month, but I think they list it every 3 or 4 months. The call book has listings for the bureaus, and generally he'll find out by speaking to other hams. Once he knows our address, he can just send us a self-addressed stamped envelope for information, and we'll send him back all of the information he needs for not only our bureau, for the incoming, but we'll send him the information for the ARRL outgoing QSL service.
How does that work?
The outgoing QSL service is operated by Joe Karsha at League headquarters in Connecticut, and for someone to utilize the outgoing service, you must, number one, alphabetize your cards by country prefix. You enclose $2 for every pound of cards and ship them to ARRL, to the QSL Bureau. You also must include the label, mailing label from QST, which is proof of membership in the League. Membership in the League, incidentally, is not required for the incoming Bureau, for our end of it, but it is required for the outgoing service.
Next, we'll take a look at some sources of more detailed DXing information.
There's a lot to learn, but by reading and just experimenting and spending a lot of time on the radio, that's good DX.
The best way to learn more about DXing is by doing it. But there are also books, magazines, and newsletters you can read, and people you can talk to. The ARRL operating manual is full of helpful information, as are 2 specialized books, the DXCC Companion and the Complete DXer.
All of the ham radio magazines include regular DXing columns along with frequent DX-related feature articles.
Another way of doing it is to have helpers. You have people spotting for you. And that's where sometimes our 2-meter repeater and the packet system are very handy.
It's very simple to get 100 countries in one weekend in a contest. Well, just watch that packet screen, and there they are.
The sport of DXing, competing for the most countries on the most bands, has been revolutionized by packet radio. Back in the olden days, say 10 years ago, a DXer had to rely mostly on his own skill and luck to find and work the DX stations he needed. Today, hundreds of DXers spread across several states can share DX tips through something called Packet Cluster.
Paul Soban, NO0T, is the Packet Cluster Coordinator, or SysOp, for Raleigh, North Carolina.
Packet cluster is like a big open line. In the older days, I guess 10 to 15 years ago, hams used VHF radios. These are hams who are DXers, used VHF radios to basically track DX, know when the band's open, that kind of thing, to communicate as an intercom system. The only unfortunate part about that is you needed headphones to be able to listen to the DX. You couldn't listen to the 2-meter radio at the same time. Well, the new advantages of a DX packet cluster is that you can watch what's going on a number of different hams stations all at the same time. You can be able to see when there's DX on in your area, and they usually tell you what frequency they're on and what their call signs are. So it's kind of like a fishing tool. You can go out there and find the DX a little bit faster by the DX spots. You basically need a 2-meter radio, FM, and a TNC, or a terminal node controller. With those 2 devices and an antenna, which is reasonably high, you should be able to communicate to the local packet cluster. What you would see when you first log on to a packet cluster is probably an announcement or a notice from the local SysOp, which will give you some information about the packet cluster. And then you'll also be able to ask it some questions. I can say show DX, which will allow me to see the last 5 spots that were posted on the packet cluster. I can say show WWV, and that'll give me the last 5 WWV propagation announcements. Rather than having to sit there and listen for the announcements 20 minutes after the hour, I could just look them up on the packet cluster. It also allows me to, when I first get onto the packet cluster, I can use it for QSL information. If I'm looking to send a card to a rare station or a DXpedition, I can usually find the QSL manager information on the packet cluster through a W6GO listing that he provides us packet cluster sysops. And one of the other advantages of the packet cluster is to be able to talk to other hams who are also logged onto the system. This is real-time communications. By simply typing the letters T and say N4YDU, I can speak to another ham across town or at the other end of the packet cluster system, which could be 2 or 3 states away. And I can communicate back and forth with him just by keying onto my keyboard. The packet cluster is very similar to a packet bulletin board in some respects because you can transmit messages back and forth by hitting S to send, and the call sign of the station you're trying to send a message to, if he is part of this packet cluster system or is logged on to the system at some time or other, the packet cluster system knows what node he is on and what state he's in, and it will put the message on his particular packet cluster node. From that, he can, when he logs onto the system, he'll notice there'll be a message to him saying there's a message for you, and please read it. And so he'll be able to read his messages. And it's you can send fairly complicated messages. The other advantage of this message system, which is something new in our particular packet cluster, is we have a show news capability. When there are DXpeditions or rare stations on, and hams get that information, they send it into to another station, which is K4CEF down in Alabama, and he takes that information and sends it to all the other packet cluster nodes, and we have a special routine in there which sets up a show news file. So if you want to find out something about a particular call sign that you're trying to work, you say show news in that call sign, and it'll tell you what the status of that particular DXpedition may be. One of the things that's not used too often right now, but we want to try to use more, is they have a show weather. So if there's weather announcements in some severe weather in the area, that could be sent out over the packet cluster to alert other hams who happen to have their cluster station on that there may be some severe weather heading their way. The other advantage is too that the software writer of the packet cluster, which is AK1A, he is devising a new piece of software which is called Aries packet cluster for amateur radio emergency services. And we're now trialing that particular software in the Raleigh area, and are going to be feeding back our results to the software designer in terms of what features and things we want to add to that particular package. And that's going to be very helpful, especially in the aftermath of a natural disaster. So it's just another advantage of having a packet cluster system. We also have, because of the fact that you've got this Aries software, you've got these hams who are using it on a daily basis in terms of the packet cluster. You've got a ready-made source of users that you can put into Aries operation right away, and they're familiar with that particular system. The packet cluster is primarily directed towards the DX or the search for DX venture. It is totally designed and engineered around helping stations who are trying to get their DXCCs to work more countries. All the tools and everything that are developed for it are in line with trying to help that particular ham with his exploits of trying to get DX. Regular bulletin boards and packet are more for communications than support of a DX operator. When using a packet cluster system, most of the operators, rather than like a regular packet board connect and disconnect, most of the operators connect to the packet cluster and stay connected for a long series of time. That's primarily so that you can keep watching these DX spots come in, because when they come in, this is real-time information that's coming in, and you will want to know that right at that point in time, and then in your case, you may want to shift your receiver to another frequency and listen for the DX station that was spotted. It's really a tool for the new DXer, the guy who wants to get on there and start working countries in a hurry. It's used by some of the DXers who have had like 300 countries. In fact, many of them have asked me or told me after they've gotten onto Packet Cluster that they have actually been able to work those rare stations that they've been looking for many, many years by using the Packet Cluster. Many new users, people who do not have a lot of countries, find it very, very valuable. So it can be used by all people, but I think the new ham is the one that's really going to use it the most.
Now, we've come to the basic question at the heart of everything else a new DXer wants to know. Can you really work DX without a beam, without a tower, without a $5,000 radio, and without an amplifier?
Oh, of course. My first 200 countries, approximately, were worked with a vertical. And that represented 10, 15, and 20 meters only. And for 40 and 80 meters, and I have over 100 countries on each of those bands, I use a dipole or an inverted V.
You don't need a monster antenna to work DX. You don't need a whole lot of power. My first station only ran about 20, 25 watts. And in fact, I do still work a lot of DX stations at the other end that are only running very modest stations. So it's not a necessity to have a large station. Small stations can work as much DX. Sometimes it just takes a little longer, that's all.
Well, we put what they said to the ultimate test. The 2 weeks during which we taped most of this program were 2 of the worst weeks in recent memory for DXing. It was summertime, there was a solar flare, and we were on the downward slope of the sunspot cycle. To put it simply, HF didn't work.
Sugar Mike 3, Hotel Lima Lima in Sweden, kilowatt, November 8 Zulu. Take it away. Again?
Yeah. Dave, is that you? WQ5Y.
K2AIO here. This thing doesn't make too much noise.
Some days you get skunked.
This is not a good day for DX. The bands are not very good, and he's not even moving the meter.
When we left NY4H's house, we went to visit Cindy Wood, KD4ACW, who had just upgraded to advanced. Her station? A 50-watt basic radio with no bells or whistles and a dipole antenna in the attic. The big guns were firing blanks that day. What could Cindy hope to do with her little BB gun?
Kilo Delta 4, Alpha Charlie Whiskey. This is Kilo Delta 4, Alpha Charlie Whiskey, temporary AA. QSL, you are 59 into North Carolina. Kilo Delta 4, Alpha Charlie Whiskey, temporary AA, QSL.
Kilo Delta 4, Alpha Charlie Whiskey, this is 9 Alpha 3 November radio.
Sierra Victor 5, Tango Sierra, this is Kilo Delta 4, Alpha Charlie Whiskey, temporary AA. This is Kilo Delta 4, Alpha Charlie Whiskey. Kilo Delta 4, Alpha Charlie Whiskey, QSL.
Kilo Delta 4. Kilo Delta 4, Alpha Charlie Whiskey, Sierra Victor 5, Tango Sierra. Very good evening, 59 on the island of Rhodes. Name Vasilis, Victor Alpha Sierra, India, Lima, India, Sierra, over.
GU0ALD, this is Kilo Delta 4, Alpha Charlie Whiskey, temporary AA, QSL.
Alpha Charlie Whiskey, you're 55 from a GU0ALD, over.
QSL.
5 by 6 into Castle Frankenstein, near the city of Darmstadt in central Germany. 73 Cindy, bye-bye.
Frankenstein's castle.
So you see, there's hope for you too. Now, let's back up the tape a little bit, and I want you to watch the look on Cindy's face after each QSO, and listen to what she says to our camera crew. Here, as promised, for the first time on videotape, is a ham being bitten by the DX bug.
73. Is that enough for you? It's enough for me. Any other exotic countries? Yes. We have the technology. We have the dipole in the attic.